So we have a great show for you this evening with a selection of different performers who will be demoing their a wide variety of instruments. The first performer will be Craig Scott and Hollie Miller, who are going to be demonstrating and talking about their wearable instrument. I will leave you to take it away.
Hello. So, yeah, this is a wearable instrument that we've built. initially the idea was we were doing a lot of performances together where Hollie was moving and I was trying to emulate her movements with manipulation of sounds. So we thought that this might be some sort of shortcut to the sounds and the arcs of the sounds coming directly from Hollie's movement. And then I could kind of step back and take more of a kind of macro kind of compositional position where I'm focusing maybe more on arrangement and stuff like that. So we went into it kind of, it was really about like Hollie being able to consciously control the sound with her body. Sorry, I should explain how the suit works first as well. So there's a series of muscle stretch tension sensors, one on each arm and one on her leg, and a heart rate monitor. And these all work in a similar way. And then there's also these stretch sensors that change resistance as Hollie stretches them from between her feet and her hands and neck. So with all of the muscle tension sensors, it became apparent quite quickly that it's like really hard to consciously control them because you just don't have that sort of sensitivity of control, like conscious control over your muscle movement. So with this setup, we've kind of decided to, it's almost like using all of the sensors to create kind of an environment for her to perform within. So she's not kind of consciously trying to exact control over the sound or over the lights. They're just responding to her movement, and then she's responding to the output of the lights and the sound. The stretch sensors, it's a bit more like literal, kind of you stretch it and the value changes. So you have a bit more control over those. So they can be used in lots of different ways. Obviously, this is like a very kind of impractical way of applying it to the human body. You can get all of these muscle tension sensors just in bands that you can kind of slip on and off quite easily. And it can all be wireless as well. But we foolishly chose to do all of this instead. So I don't know if it's worth sharing my screen now or if people want to come up afterwards and have a look. But essentially most of what's going on is just within Max for Live, so Max within Ableton. And really, I suppose there's kind of like three elements. So there was lots of samplers that the playback speed and playback direction is being controlled by the sensors. And then there was an AM drone, which has like 4 kind of harmonics that are all attached to different sensors. I should probably show you, sorry. So there's AM drone here. So there's lots of options. Pretty much the whole time there was kind of the 4 harmonics being controlled by different sensors. And then there's the modulator signal, which is responding to that as well. And the harmony of those 4 harmonics shifts every kind of X amount of heartbeats. So every time, 12 heartbeats pass, then it kind of shifts to a different tonality. And then there is a heartbeat sequencer, which is the kind of white noise kind of psh, psh, was going on for most of the beginning, I think. And that's just every X amount of heartbeats, it will ungate one kind of attack. And then these are all the various speed samplers. That I was just kind of dragging lots of different samples in that are all kind of real world samples. So it's things like hydrophone recordings of like fizzy liquids and farty kind of sounds, birds, just a mixture of lots of things that kind of give you goosebumps, I think is the main criteria. So there's quite a few of those attached to different sensors. And then the last one really was just a delay, which is a similar-ish, like different repeats attached to different volume. Sorry, each repeat attached to a different sensor. So like these things are inherently quite unstable. So like every time we perform, different combinations of the sensors respond quite nicely. Some of them don't. So but that's part of the fun, maybe, or part of the frustration. I don't know, depending on your outlook. That's kind of how it works. Any questions? Yeah.
Parameters to set. How do you decide what parameters to set? why 12 heartbeats? Why not 8?
Oh, yeah.
Have you tried 8 and
Yeah,
it just
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
sound right?
No,
and
no,
then
no.
and tried 16 and then, oh no.
It's just, I wouldn't say random, but I kind of change it all just as and when. But some, yeah, it just depends how you want. I guess that's kind of like the conscious decision-making thing that you have over it, and then so much of it is kind of like not automated, but kind of just responding in real time to what's going on. But yeah, you can change all those parameters as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Wow, that was amazing. That was
thank
amazing. Unfortunately, came in slightly late, so probably got a stupid question. But you made this setup bespoke yourself, or you've kind of?
Yeah. So I mean, everything you can see we've made, but like so there's like boards for the muscle tension sensors. So I didn't make all of the kind of, so it's all kind of housed within here. So there's 3 really small, they're called BioWare boards. You can buy them off the shelf. And what else? Oh, so this is all just going back to this box here, which is just like essentially an Arduino. So it's just taking the signals and then converting it to MIDI, and then I'm only dealing with MIDI on the computer end. So the values are quite limited as well. Like you can do it in other ways, which you can get much more kind of like detailed or like nuanced, kind of accurate reading of everything. Yeah.
Sorry, and then in terms of how you did it, kind of, not that isn't creative, but in terms of like the performance of it, is it completely improv? Do you kind of have you established like some kind of some kind of language of how you might do things, or do you just kind of?
Yeah, so I think. I mean, do you want to talk on it as well?
I mean, it's like a structured improv. So we have certain imagery that that I draw on, like embryology imagery around birth, like cyborgs, posthumanism, like all these kind of things. And very much about creating and responding to the environment made by the sound. So some of it's quite womb-like, some of it's quite like you're in space, or this kind of thing. And trying to create some sort of world or atmosphere with the sound. And also designing the costume in a way that kind of has embryology imagery, like the umbilical cord, and kind of, like drawing in science fiction films. Sure. Like Alien and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the sound, I guess, kind of comes from, because I kind of did music for a lot of Hollie's films and stuff like that. So we'd done a lot of other live performances in other contexts. So it's kind of like we'd established this kind of palette or kind of aesthetic, kind of not boundary, but you know what I mean, kind of like honed in on something. And then this is just another way of kind of like processing that, I guess, in a live situation.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Are there any other questions? There's one over here, yes.
Thank you. That was really beautiful to watch and really interesting to hear about as well. I'm wondering, in your sort of explorations, how do you find that the more dynamic movement, how does that impact the sound? And whether you've tried that with the sort of imagery.
Yeah, so I think when we first started, and it was kind of, we were thinking more along the lines of Hollie is going to, I am going to control the sound by moving my arm in this direction or doing this movement. Then the movement ended up being more kind of like stochastic and maybe that kind of dynamic, like trying to cover full ranges in one movement. And also in previous versions, I wasn't really like calibrating any of the sensors, if you know what I mean. So it was just like a raw output. So you'd get more kind of like of these extreme variations. But with this, it's kind of, with the calibration that I'm using at the moment, it kind of averages out everything a little bit as well. So there's a kind of element of it dulling that kind of intensity of dynamic range or the width of the dynamic range, which isn't necessarily a good thing. We're still trying to kind of find a balance, I think.
Yeah, I think as well as like the instrument's temperamental, so it doesn't always, if I do that, it doesn't always make an obvious sound, which was quite frustrating to start with, but then it's finding some kind of way of responding to an environment, and then sometimes it's very clear, like I'll make a gesture and I'll hear a sound, but then sometimes it's trying to find that moment and find the sound and find the gesture. It's like we realized that the instrument is a collaborator. It's like a third person in our equation. So it's like collaborating with an invisible entity, and that has a mind of its own and doesn't always respond.
Yeah, and kind of the thing of it, like the communication between us being mediated, having to be mediated through this technology as well, is quite another kind of hurdle, I suppose.
It was like a really interesting tension, because we were watching you and it was like, I understand how that sound is being made and understanding your movement, but then, as you say, that collaborator in between of like watching your movement sometimes and that sound not responding. So it was really fascinating to watch, because I was like, oh, what is the interplay, and what if you did that? And that was quite nice tension as a viewer.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you.
Cool, cheers.
Lovely. Any other questions in the room? And if it doesn't look like it, have we got any, Deborah, have we got any online questions at the moment? No online questions. So actually, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So I mean, I think it's such an interesting instrument, and it takes such a different approach to instrument building, and it's really focused on your particular movement. And I know that, I mean, we're here talking about accessible instruments, and so I wonder if you could, I know you're working a little bit on the accessibility of this and how it might be applied in different contexts. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that. That would be great.
So I think the muscle tension sensors, there is an inherent instability. Like, I think you can use things like machine learning and that kind of thing to like learn gestures and that kind of thing, which I think a lot of people are doing with them now. So you could get much more nuanced control out of those. I think the stretch sensors are very flexible in that they can be applied to, like, I meant to bring with me some other examples of like other things that I made, but I think they could be applied in lots of different ways, just because they could be, it's just so flexible as to how they're housed and what you're using to put force on them and to control them.
Also, we designed it to fit my body, so the measurements, and I'm working with flexible materials like latex and rubber, and so thinking about like housing electronics in kind of more bodily like textiles as a way to fit and this kind of thing.
Yeah, brilliant. I think it's we had a Nicola Woodham last time with a fabric-based instrument, which has many of the same kind of affordances to it, which I think is really interesting. I think the way that you've combined multiple different sensors in this way is a really interesting approach. And, we have another question in the room. Let me.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah.
That was magic. And another stupid question, technical.
No.
These black strings, are they functional in terms of making sounds, or there's something like
Yeah, so these are, they're, I can't remember exactly what they're called. Hugh's the expert on these, I think. Conductive rubber, is that, conductive rubber stretch sensors, is that what that's how you'd Google it, at least. So you just pass a very small voltage through it, and the resistance of it changes as it's stretched. So then you can read the difference in voltage due to the change in resistance, if that makes sense. Yeah.
We have a question from the chat. Do you want to let me pass the mic over to you, Deborah?
Thank you. So the question is, how is this used and applied to disabled musicians? Perhaps you can talk about how it can be made accessible.
Yeah. So I really think that, I suppose it was in how, so these sensors are, I mean, it's very distracting to look at everything, I guess, all in one, but kind of like, if you were to just take these sensors, they can be, because I've made something that's maybe just like in a hand, and you have control over maybe 10 parameters within one hand. So that could be, it's just in how the sensors are applied, I suppose. Like they're very, I think, at least I don't know, they're very flexible in how you can apply them for different needs, specific needs.
And I think as well that this is modular, so we've made this for the whole body, but aspects of it could be taken and adapted to the body in different ways. So.
Yeah, I don't know if that is that.
Okay,
yeah.
Brilliant.
Cool.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll wrap up this section here. So we can have one more round of applause, please, for Craig and Hollie. Absolutely amazing.